I can't remember exactly what it was, but Jeremy's like, all of a sudden, he's like, oh, holy crap, dude. He's like, that's the, whatever it was, the restaurant there where you're like, that's where I met Bill Winke for the first time.
What was it? Is it Indian? Is that what it is? The old Indian?
Oh, Indian Hills?
Indian Hills. Yeah, I was like, I stayed there all the time. And then the old Hy-Vee. I'm like, Bill and I ate breakfast at Hy-Vee a lot.
The old number 7.
Yeah, the old number 7.
HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Deer Grow.
Man, we've been using Deer Grow products for a long time. The Plot Start and Plot Boost, more recently Plot Till. Now we've got 3 new liquid fertilizers that have been put in the mix that will cover everything we could want for a food plot program.
It's huge, man. The more food plotting we do, it's like, man, the liquids just make sense. Like whether it's herbicides or the Plot Start and Plot Boost, and now the fertilizers getting mixed in. It's like, man, I can combine all of those in certain cases and do less passes for more results.
I mean, it's all about efficiency. I mean, like you said, less passes. If you're out there treating your beans with glyphosate in the summertime, you can mix in this fertilizer, do that all at once. You have the boost in there that helps the metabolism. It's all about efficiency when we're talking about food plots. And really the big difference on these liquid fertilizers is you're bypassing some of these soil limitations, pH limitations, the soil type. In a lot of cases, we talk about dry fertilizers only being available for 17% of what you put down in the first year. These liquid fertilizers straight into the plant are 90% available in the first year. Huge difference in what you're going to see in growth.
It's huge. And so right now you can use code HUNTR15 for 15% off any of the Deer Grow products on their website. And as always,
better food plots, bigger deer. And we're back.
Hey,
HUNTR Podcast, episode 221. As Nick keeps us in line. Nick, there's been a massive request for probably you to have a camera on you at some point. I know you're editing a lot too, but maybe at least in these intros, we start getting the third angle.
Third eye. I start saying
blind.
Did you turn us up since the last podcast?
No, I don't.
No. We sound a little louder to me.
I think your ears are just clearer.
Oh, I had my muffs on. I had my HUNTR beanie. Here's a great spot here for a HUNTR beanie. Wow.
Oh, I actually should just check to see if this camera's on real quick.
Schmuffle.
All right, Word, why don't you check that?
As Nick's keeping himself in line.
Okay. Well, as he's checking that, it looks like we're on. Cool. Well, hey, thank you guys for being here, whether you're listening on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Those are the places we post the show, and we drop them every Tuesday and Thursday nights at 6 p.m. Eastern time. You can give us a like, follow, or subscribe, whatever's appropriate for the channel, and one of those will give you a notification as to when these drop, so that's helpful. As I mentioned, we have some merch on the website. That's how Nick gets paid. It's also, we appreciate you guys supporting us in that way. If you've written us on Instagram DM or the website, those are the 2 that we check most frequently. As you can imagine, we got a bit bombarded there after the Iowa success, which is awesome. It's great to hear from you guys. And but if we're backlogged, we apologize for that.
We're catching up.
Other than that, here we go.
We're recording this on November 14th. If my math is correct, I don't know. It's like 24th or 25th, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's the 24th.
24th.
We're
24th of November.
Slowly but surely reaching an echelon of podcast numbers that if I'm relating them to deer scores, we may never hit.
Yeah.
Actually, it's the 26th.
It's the 26th.
Yeah.
So
2 days before
Thanksgiving. So good time. I mean, the hard part is like we are at this point imminent end of November.
Let me get a little less in my ear. Just turn my master down there, Nick. Just a click.
Little imminent less end of November, which kind of is depressing a bit. We look forward to November for so long, and then she gone.
That's okay. I mean, that's what happens. You know what I mean? It comes, and it goes, and then here we are.
Come.
And then we eat turkey, and then we, on to the next. I start getting fired. I mean, truthfully, I kind of feel like my rut hunting is like maybe behind. I mean, surely by the time this is dropping, but even by today, whatever, the 17th or 14th. That was kind of it. You know what I mean? I think we kind of hit the peak there. Not that I won't kill one in Illinois on some sort of a rut pattern, but it's going to be at that point trending towards a combination of rut/food.
Yeah, they're definitely looking for last does, but also realizing, shit, it's getting cold and I better fill my belly. So they're going to start doing that, which is kind of good because, I mean, they've really been, at least from what I've seen, haven't been touching like the standing grain like at all. Very, very much off of it. So yeah, it's kind of that last point here where they're scraping up the last bit of does. They're going to start really feeding. I've assumed pretty imminent here to like stop hunting mornings again. And basically it's just an afternoon type thing.
Yeah. I don't know what the cutoff for that is.
I think it's just dependent on like if you've got it's access based, right?
I don't think it's next week when I'm in Illinois. I think it's
I would hunt through November,
around Thanksgiving, maybe between Thanksgiving and December 1st is probably the last of your morning hunts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unless you've got a deer on pattern and you can access it, then go kill him. Like if he's coming through that field or that food plot back to bed, like go kill him.
Dude, I have become less of a fan of morning huntings. Morning hunts.
Morning huntings.
Even this year, I've seen bucks. So that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
But it's kind of stressful, like, and also not my preferred way to set up, because like you want to feel like you can get in somewhere clean and then set up before anything starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, first of all, it's like you got to get in clean, which is a challenge in and of itself, and then you got to set everything up in the tree. So I got a camera arm, I got the GoPro, I got to pull my bow up. It's like, it's not like you get in and you just settle in. It's just like as soon as I'm up there, I'm like, I should be still. So in a lot of cases, there's like, I feel like the morning goes on, I might not get my jacket on until 9 o'clock.
Yep.
Because I got to unclip my bino harness, pull it off. It's just way too much movement.
That's usually my justification. If I hang the night before, I'm coming right back in there, leave it all in there.
Oh, that's
so I just slip up in there and she's just ready.
I haven't done that one time this year.
I did it for the first time.
That used to be my signature move.
Did it for the first time in the bedroom in Illinois the other day.
That's a power play.
Yeah, it was great. I was up in there, just knocked an arrow, and I felt perfect. Yeah, I was in the spot. So yeah, it's but it's we're getting to that point. If you're listening to this, it's kind of towards the tail end of it. But what we're looking at coming up is that tail end of the rut. They're going to start feeding heavier again. We've got some cold weather coming up, some like highs in the low 40s, even high 30s, 20s at night. Like all of that's going to start to combine. And at the same time, if this is dropping 26th, you've got Ohio gun season, Pennsylvania gun season coming up for openers. You've got the tail end of several gun seasons, including, there's a second, I don't remember exactly when the second Illinois gun season is. It might have just finished as this dropped. So you're kind of like coming out of things, you're going into other ones depending on what state you're in, and it's just it's a lot of different stuff going on, and that's why you can't just lay kind of this blueprint blanket strategy over it. It's do you have food? Are you in the big woods? Is it gun hunting? Is there pressure? Like
dude, that's a great looking hat you got on there. It's distracting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. We just got those in today. I was like, that's a sharp looking hat.
Just broke
nice
that out.
Brim. Yeah.
That's like my favorite color, green.
It's a good one.
Wow.
I believe it's going to match my new Hoyt.
Would you go with the olive or whatever?
Yeah, it was the it's just, I don't know, hunter green or something like that.
Green.
Green. Yeah, like that.
Cool.
Anyways,
distracted.
No, you're fine. That's kind of where we're at. We have a pretty cool guest today. Again, reminder to people, this is November 14th.
You should say we had big dreams going to Iowa.
We had big dreams.
We went out and it did not disappoint. We fulfilled our wildest Iowa dreams.
Big dreams.
And in the spirit of dreaming big, we got Bill Winke back.
We got Bill
today.
Yeah. So just kind of pretexting here with Bill. It's November 14th as we're recording this. Clearly, it's like go time from a hunting standpoint. We're going to get Bill back in the tree stand here this afternoon. We're recording this midday.
Yeah, it may be brief. But we'll do our best in the time that we have here.
It's Bill, so we'll take every minute we get and go through a bunch of stuff. And excited to have him back on and kind of hear about what's going on with the farm and him and Jordan and kind of that dynamic. I know he's also kind of been mentoring a lot of the younger kids in the area. Just kind of excited.
Maybe
to
a coup to gain access at some point.
Maybe. Oh, you don't bow hunt,
but you teach your son how to bow hunt here. Yeah.
And then you watch me. You watch me, and then you repeat. Okay. Yeah, that's the way.
Good strategy. Solid strategy. I like it.
So anyways, let's go ahead and get Bill on the show. All right.
Good to see you, Bill.
Yeah, good to be here. Is this, am I in a good setting here? I look dark on my end.
No, I think it looks beautiful, actually. I feel like I'm going to see a buck right over your left shoulder here in a few minutes.
You'd be seeing the not
if you
so
do,
obvious,
tell me.
Norm here, because it's been a little bit slow for me.
Well, I mean, we can dive right into it, Bill. Like, obviously a lot of us have we haven't missed an episode, right? We're watching kind of what you're going through on the bow hunting whitetail side and stuff.
We are. If you ever feel like people aren't, we are tuning in for every episode.
Every one of them.
Well, there's two Well, I got 2 viewers anyway, right?
You got 2.
At least, well, next 3.
And I would say pretty
3.
good viewers at that, right?
Yeah.
Pretty good viewers. But, you know, I mean, I guess observationally, like the farm is beautiful. Like it looks amazing, right? What's your mindset right now? Like, what are you thinking is going on?
Well, I think it's just the history of the property is probably working against me. I think this area got hit pretty hard before I bought it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and the market was tough and still is tough. If you're trying to buy land, you know, you don't get to really pick exactly which neighborhoods you want to be in. You're sort of like, well, this is for sale. You know, is it at least a starting point?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what this place was. I wanted to be in this area because this is where my family is, and this is where I'm from. You know, so if you're casting a wider net, you could probably be a little bit more selective and get into a neighborhood that's maybe a little bit further along. But this will be all right. It's just more challenging than what I'm used to.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of a low starting point compared to a lot of places that I've hunted in the past.
Yeah. I think one of the things, and I think I've texted you about this before. So I've got a place in Kentucky that is very similar. Like if you look at the farm from like a drone side, you're like, oh my gosh, like it sets up so well. It's got great funnels. Like it's got good open ground for food. There's just no deer. Like it's very, very, very low deer density.
Yeah. And I think that I'm okay with the density. It was just the age structure.
Okay.
You know, and you know, the density is a little bit low, but not bad. It's just that the total lack of mature bucks. And, you know, it takes 5 years to grow a 5-year-old buck.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be basically 5 years before I really start seeing this thing pay off. And, you know, I got 2 years left. This is the 3rd season.
Yep.
And there's the odd one, you know, every year there's the odd one. But boy, it's pretty tough when you got one you're trying to kill over ground, you know, basically that's this big and this rough, and the deer have so many options. You know, I'm not complaining. It's an interesting challenge, but it's just harder, tougher hunting.
Bill, are you meaning that like the guys that hunted it before you? I mean, do you know them? Was it a lease, or the landowners hunted it, or?
No, I think it was just the firearms pressure in this part of the state is just way higher than where you guys hunted.
Yeah.
Everybody here is a gun hunter, and it's big, massive groups, and it's a social thing. And I don't hold it against anybody. I mean, I grew up in this area. You know, I know what it's all about. You know, it's a lot of camaraderie. The fellowship is probably more important than a lot of other things. So, you know, there's not a lot of, you know, quote unquote management or even, you know, quote unquote trophy hunting. It's more just, hey, we're going deer hunting. Let's fill the back of the truck up with deer, have some fun, hang out with the family. That's kind of what the tradition is here. And, you know, I think this farm in this particular area didn't get bow hunted super hard. I think it just got gun hunted really hard.
Yeah. Do you think with that kind of tradition of the gun hunting there, do you think that the party hunting side was really big there as well?
I think it's big everywhere.
Yeah.
Well, at least in this part of Iowa. I mean, it's nothing for, you know, somebody to shoot $4 on one drive, you know, one guy. You know, if a bunch of bucks run by and he's got, you know, enough shells in his shotgun, he'll just keep shooting until they're all dead. You know, that's because you know, as long as you've got a group of guys, you just start handing tags out once the deer are down, and you know, make sure you got a tag for every one of them, and then you're good. And again, it's the tradition. You know, I'm not here to point fingers or, you know, say what's right and what's wrong. That's just the way it's always been, and I understand that. It's just it makes it more challenging when you're starting out in a neighborhood that hasn't had very much management.
Now that pressure's been removed from your farm, and you guys are obviously putting in a lot of work to improve it and stuff, and you're passing on the younger age class of bucks, do you think you'll be able to overcome or come back from that? Does the neighboring pressure seem manageable? Like, are you optimistic about a few years in the future?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, every year it just looks a little bit better. I mean, there's a bunch of really nice 3-year-olds on the farm this year, you know, that given 2 more years, they're all going to be the kind of deer that we like to hunt.
Yep.
You know, and assuming that they're not getting picked off, you know, around the outside, which it doesn't seem like they are. You know, at least I don't get the sense that there's a lot of people are just waiting to shoot deer that jump the fence. You know, and overall in Iowa, most people, as you know, they're pretty decent about respecting, property rights and so forth. So, I'm not expecting any problems. It's just, if somebody's hunting a farm a quarter of a mile away and some of these bucks walk by that I've been passing up, they're probably not going to pass them up.
Right.
And, eventually that'll change. It's just a matter of time. I mean, people are going to get it out of their system. And I mean, what you guys saw in southern Iowa is kind of what I saw down there. 150-inch deer isn't a big deer in southern Iowa. It's just a buck. It's nothing, people don't even, if you have one in the back of your truck, they don't even, at the quick start, they don't even look at it.
Yeah.
And that's a big deer here in the minds of the local hunting population. And, someday that'll change. Gosh, I thought when I left down in southern Iowa, you had to kill a 190 before anybody even cared. It was crazy. How many big deer were killed in that area, and the main reason is because they just didn't shoot the smaller ones. They just weren't interested.
Yep.
Even the casual deer hunters, they didn't care about a 150 because they knew that the standard was higher than that. So I think I recently saw this quote, and it said it was like if everybody shoots, what was that again? If you want to shoot giant bucks, if everybody wants to shoot giant bucks, then everyone needs to shoot only giant bucks.
Yep.
Right. So then the age structure is there, and that's just not the mindset here. And, and again, it's like, this isn't the whole world to me. I mean, my life doesn't revolve, 100% around, killing a 190.
Sure.
But it would be nice to be able to see the potential of this property because we put so much work into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember, years ago, Bill, on your old farm, and it was probably some of the early days of having it. You told me about how many just mature deer, like not high scoring necessarily, but just sheer numbers of mature deer on that farm that you basically had a bunch of people come in and just shoot mature deer because it was the only way to get rid of them all. Yeah.
And we used to, when I first started filming, we had what were called cameraman bucks. And so I carried a bow and the cameraman carried a bow. And if a buck was coming in and it was a mature deer and I didn't want to shoot it and the cameraman wanted to shoot it, he'd swing the camera over to me and he'd grab his bow and I'd film him, shooting those deer. So we took quite a few cameraman bucks off that farm. It was kind of a fun way to do it because, you get more content for the episodes. Plus you serve the purpose of, getting some of those bucks killed.
Yep. Well, yeah. And I mean, obviously in the, challenge or the goal of trying to keep some of those younger high scoring deer on there, removing those bigger mature bucks that weren't high scoring was a huge factor in that.
Yeah, for sure. Because people don't really necessarily appreciate how aggressive some of those older bucks can be. And it's not always the ones that have the big antlers. It just seems like it usually isn't the ones that have the big antlers.
Right.
It seems like those old bullies are the 135-inch, 9-pointers. And they just have a big body and a bad attitude. And they just rule the place. And, like you said, if you leave them there, then the bucks that have better genetics get run out and they can't find a home. So it's part of the whole overall management. You got to take those, but I don't have them here. I mean, I'd be hunting those bucks if I had them here.
Yeah, that's what's so strange about it is it's like, because people just hear Iowa and, I think you just described it very well of not just the landscape, but the hunting culture, very different between, southern Iowa and where you're at in the northeastern part of Iowa.
Oh, no, I know all about the different neighborhoods. I mean, I've owned land in a lot of different neighborhoods and in some of the areas, even where you guys hunted, not specifically there, but, in those counties. And it's so different. If you want to kill big deer, you got to be where there are like-minded neighbors. And there are some phenomenal neighborhoods, in some parts of the state where, thousands upon thousands of acres are more or less under the same sort of management scheme. And you're going to kill giant deer every year because, they just need age. You throw maybe 1 out of 10 or maybe even 1 out of 5 is going to be really big. when he hits 5 or 6 years old. The rest of them are going to be nice, average, mature bucks. But, if you get them all to 5 or 6 years old, then, a high percentage of those deer are going to be huge.
Yeah.
Bill, we left for Iowa. It was the morning of the 4th,
Yep.
I think, at like a fairly reasonable time.
I left my house at 5 a.m.
Yeah, early, but it's like a 13-hour jaunt out there. We had 18 hours of travel all in.
And we pulled a trailer and a side-by-side.
We had a 2-hour, pit stop at a client. And, but regardless, we were, whenever we got to, there's a town, I think they're north of Albia. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but Jeremy's like, all of a sudden, he's like, oh, holy crap, dude. He's like, that's the, whatever it was, the restaurant there where you're like, that's where I met Bill Winke for the first time.
What was it? Is it Indian? Is that what it is? The old Indian?
Indian Hills?
Indian Hills. Yeah, I was like, I stayed there all the time. And then the old Hy-Vee, I'm like, Bill and I ate breakfast at Hy-Vee a lot.
No, the old number 7.
Yeah, the old number 7.
It was pretty cool. I was like, we must be in Iowa where Jeremy's got landmarks. He's like, that's where I met Bill Winke for the first time,
Yeah, you can mark some of that country by the places where you eat.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think that's as big a deal as the places where we hunt.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was funny. We were just driving through and it was, it was still dark. It was dark at that point. And I was like, that's Indian Hills. I stayed there, I don't know, a lot of weekends.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Hoyt.
What can we say, man? Another year back with Hoyt. We're both shooting RX8s. I'm shooting 70 pounds in the bourbon, which I love bourbon.
It's great.
And you're shooting 80 pounds in the straight black.
Blacked out as always, man. I got the, so I'm shooting the 500 grain Easton Arrow this year. And at 80 pounds, I'm flinging that thing at like 300 feet per second. I mean, it's deadly. Put a water buffalo in front of me and he's done.
I mean, we shot it earlier. You literally put an arrow through a brand new target, like never been shot before.
I know. So one other thing that Hoyt is doing this year is they're making all their own strings in-house. And so the quality is top notch and it just really is something that is setting them apart from their competitors.
Well, what we always try to do when we go to our bow shop, Ultimate Outdoors, is we try to shoot other bows just to make sure that we are really giving everybody a fair chance.
Sure.
The reality is it's a no-brainer. Hoyt, it stands above all of them every single time.
Definitely. And so right now you can use code HUNTR, HUNTR, for 20% off any apparel on the Hoyt website. And as always,
get serious, get Hoyt.
You were a big part of our Iowa trip, whether you knew it or not. And I saw, I think it was the Lindsay's, Jeff probably posted something like, for all those observed National Bill Winke Day.
Yeah, on the 11/7.
It was on the 7th. And we had already, we didn't even get to that point. I mean, we tagged out on the 5th and on the 6th. And on the 7th, we drank the rest of our beer, ate the rest of our eggs, and hit the road to Illinois,
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, obviously some years are different, but year in and year out, if you average it over enough time, that 3-4 day period right there is really, really good. 5th through the 9th, to say. It's pretty hard to beat that most years.
Yeah, and we had a really good weather front that kicked through. Like perfect. As we were driving out, I mean, it was nasty headwind. It was raining the whole time. And then that next day when Jared killed, right around lunchtime, you started to see blue sky and some sun peek through, and it's like, boy, this is going to clear out
go time
faster than we thought.
Yeah. No, that's right. And I remember the weather pattern. I was in the tree that afternoon, the afternoon of the 5th. Yeah, that's right. And it was pretty rough. I mean, it was raining here and blowing, but you got to be there.
Yep.
Especially when the weather clears out, like you said. When something nasty blows through, usually it's pretty good on the backside of that.
Yeah, and I mean, Jared and I were 50 minutes apart on different farms, and I was a little further west. It never stopped like misting and just being nasty. So when he shot afterwards, I was like, well, dude, what was the weather? Like, he was like, oh, it's perfect. Like it cleared up and I was like, what? I was like, I was in like just a misty, nasty mess the entire night, and I didn't really see much.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Yeah. You can just feel it.
You guys hit it right. You hit it right. And it's I always tell people this is you got to be careful because the stories like yours sort of set the tone.
Yeah.
It's not realistic.
No.
And because I had one season, I don't remember what year it was, but I hunted my farm, which arguably was one of the better farms in Iowa. 50 straight days, never saw a buck for me to grab my bow. 50 straight days.
Wow.
So I hunted every day of the rut, a good part of the middle of October on into even into December. And you think about that and you say, okay, now you got the guy coming in here from out of state,
Pennsylvania.
And he's got maybe a 1 week vacation.
Yeah.
And then 4 or 5 years, he draws another tag. I had like 40 years worth of hunting in Iowa, for a non-resident on my farm without even seeing a shooter.
Yeah.
So, you guys caught it right. You're in a good area, obviously.
We were.
Well, we know the rarity of it all too well, Bill. I mean, and that's what gives us so much appreciation. And we literally would say out loud, we're like, dude, you understand, like, there's guys in Iowa that are hunting whole season, like a decade in Iowa, and might not ever kill a deer like one of those that we killed, and for us to come out and who knows how much of it. I mean, we worked really hard for it, and we had the connections to be in the right place, but there's always an element of luck.
Sure.
And to do it in the first, 2 hours, or in Jeremy's case, his second sit, the second day, it's just like, we appreciate how special that is and how rare it is.
And it's awesome. I mean, you should be congratulated for doing it. It's just people have to keep a realistic idea of what's possible. And granted, if you can jump around a little bit when you're stuck on one farm, like in my situation,
yep.
And I can probably get permission to hunt other places, but it's kind of awkward because everybody knows me here.
Yeah.
And I know everybody, and you feel like you're displacing some, high school kid who's been hunting there or whatever, and you don't feel good about it. And then, any managed property, everybody's got rules about, it's not like you just sweep in there and they say, oh yeah, you can shoot the biggest deer.
Shoot whatever you want. Yeah.
Right. And then they look at you and they think, well, don't you have your own farm? How come you're knocking on my door?
Aren't you Bill Winke?
Yeah.
Can I come on your farm?
Yeah. Well, we just had a pretty deep conversation on this, Bill, because obviously Jared and I are like-minded with you in that, like, we put a lot of effort into our personal properties. To your point, though, you kind of get stuck. So you have what you have. And, the more and more we talk to people who are killing consistently, especially over 170-inch deer, they're surveying and covering thousands and thousands of acres. Maybe not like contiguous, but it's like they've got an 80 here. They've got permission on a ditch and 20 here. Like that, they have to go out and find them. Whereas, the mindset of the three of us especially is like, we want to develop and grow, but to your point, it takes 5 years to do that, to get a mature buck.
Well, and even then, even once you're at that point, like that Southern Iowa farm, it wasn't good every year, and even when it was into its, upper end of the development process, it still wasn't good every year. There were some years when it was really, really good, like maybe one of the best farms in the country. And then there were some years when you'd say, well, there's mature deer here, but they score 145. That's sort of anyway, there's cycles, there's ebbs and flows. I was recently talking with Mark Drury, and they've got access to a lot of ground. And he said they're not seeing, this year wasn't a really big buck year even for those guys. And, so even when you own it, when it's a good farm or even a great farm, it's still only going to be great maybe 1 out of every 3 years, just because of the way deer are.
Yeah.
It doesn't, unless you just got thousands and thousands of acres, which, some people do, I guess, but it's kind of unrealistic, obviously, to think you're going to hunt areas that big.
Well,
but then let's go back to what you said. If I was going to kill a really big deer every year, like on purpose, I'd have to cast a wider net. I'd have to have cameras in a lot more locations. You can't rely on one property.
Yep.
Because it's just too limited.
Yeah.
That is the conversation. I know that's the root of what Jeremy's asking, because, you've obviously had a lot of experience with, especially the former. So if one path is, let's build as big of a farm, a cohesive piece that I can manage, and, everything that comes with that, or the mindset is, I want to kill the biggest deer that I can. I'm going to spread myself out, sample more areas, have, less liability for EHD and stuff like that. Jeremy,
even at that, like, let's say you take the amount of money that you put into owning your own land and you invest it someplace, you could go on an awful lot of really good whitetail hunts with what you come up with every year from return from that investment.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
So you could lease some really good stuff. I mean, so land ownership doesn't guarantee big deer. All it does is gives you a sense of stewardship, I guess, or, I just love land.
Yeah.
And everybody thinks, oh, if I had my own farm, it's not quite like that. Maybe someday.
That is the question that we it's been cool to be faced with it, and we're blessed to have the opportunity, but it's like, that is the question. Like, we both acknowledge, all three of us here could say initially, like at face value, we probably would have said, I want to shoot the biggest, oldest deer that we can. So, but then the next layer of that is like, okay, so do you want to own the land that it's on, or is it okay that it's not? Do you want to lease it, and does it matter that it's a part of a bigger farm that you've managed and spent all this effort to put together, or can it just be one that you picked up and there happened to be a big deer on it? And so we're having to now ask ourselves the question of like, what do we get the most satisfaction out of, and therefore which path do we want to, push down?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's excuse me, that's a fair question, because it's one that I ask myself sometimes when it's going pretty slow on my land. It's like, gosh, why didn't I just keep my lease, and then knock on doors? Would have been a whole lot cheaper, and I'd have come out way ahead financially. But, land is a decent investment. It's been a little bit questionable now, some of the prices we've had to buy at, how good that investment really is. I haven't seen probably much of a return on the stuff I've bought, just because, everything had jumped so much.
Mm-hmm.
But I did well on the Southern Iowa farm, put it that way. This one's pretty questionable. So anyway, at its best, it's a good investment. But you also have all the work that goes with it all the time. And you've got to love that process. I think if you don't love the process of owning land, you're better off just going on hunts and, even knocking on doors or even paying lease fees if you have to do that.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing is like after my experiences and where I'm at with my side, like I enjoy just going out there and changing the habitat and managing things. And maybe I get 150-inch 5-year-old on camera and there's bigger deer around, but like if that's on my property, that is the ultimate goal. Like there he is. It's a mature deer. It's on this property. He's thrived off of things that I've done and manipulated.
Yeah. No, I think so. And I think that's where it's just a different viewpoint. I don't think I'd want to go back. I like owning land.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved land ever since I was a kid, and owning it, I think, was a dream.
Yeah.
And now it's like, even though I know I can kill bigger deer, if I didn't own land, which sounds stupid, but that's the reality of it.
Mm-hmm.
I still wouldn't trade this.
Well, in fairness, I guess you can have both, right? I mean, it's not like you have one tag on one farm in one state and that's it. Right. Even in Iowa, you can get 3 tags. So
and I could get access to hunt some of the areas down where you guys were at, and I'm sure I could go back in my home area. It's just that you put so much into this,
right?
And then, you just aren't going to drive away and say, well, I'm going to go hunt someplace else. I had a invite to hunt a really, really good farm, probably not too far from where you guys were down there. I mean, just loaded up with big deer. And I thought, gosh, do I really want to just kill a big deer, or do I want to have this experience, of hunting my farm?
Yeah.
So I guess that's kind of, everybody has a different point that they come into this. And maybe I'm old enough now that killing the big deer is really fun. I love doing it. But I think the management and the stewardship part of it has become maybe even a bigger element of the overall experience for me.
For sure.
Well, and I mean, I think especially if we all are following along this year, like you and Jordan have had a really cool relationship on doing a lot of stuff on that farm.
Yeah. And that's something that we'll never forget,
right?
From the whatever you want to call it, the relationship building and just hanging out with your family and doing cool stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, even if it's like, boy, yeah, it'd be great to have a 180 to be chasing around here. The fact is that you guys went through all the management in the spring and summer, and you see the work paying off, and you also see the challenges and face those together. If anything, it's an amazing learning lesson for her, right?
Yeah. No, and she'll, I mean, someday she won't be as involved because she'll, get married and have family and do all that stuff, but she'll never forget the time that we did this.
Yep.
I got to yell at my dog. He's over here whining, Bentley, knock it off. See, that's what happens when you whine around my place.
That's why Jordan's not there right now. You just locked her in the truck behind you. Yelled at her.
Yeah, no, she doesn't she doesn't like this weather. I mean, if you can sit in a ground blind, she's good. But if she had to sit in a tree now, even if it's 50 degrees with a 15-mile-an-hour wind, she'd be like, "No, Dad, I'd rather do something else."
Well, I saw that when you guys were hanging in that cedar the other day, and she forgot her jacket, and you're like, "Well, I brought mine." Like, you know,
you're like, that sucks.
Yeah, you're gonna be cold.
Yeah. So it's so she'll probably show back up again, in December when we can get back in the blinds, and that style of hunting makes more sense. Right now, you need to be in the hardwoods. You need to be back in the cover, and it's not very conducive to hunting out of blinds.
What is the deal, Bill, do you live nearby to the farm there? And how far is Jordan? I mean, how much time are you guys spending at the farm there?
Well, I mean, I'm here a lot now. The house is 3 hours away.
No way.
So at some point I'll probably have to, I don't know what I'll do. There's no real place to live here, and I don't really want to spend the money right now to build a nice place. So there's kind of a temporary, if you want to call it that, living quarters. But eventually I'll need to make it a little bit nicer so that this can be more permanent.
I had no idea you were so far from the farm.
Oh yeah, and she's 4 hours from the farm.
Wow.
So yeah, she lives in Des Moines now. So for her to make the trip up here, it's got to be, we got to coordinate this better.
Yeah.
As far as like when we're going to, what we're going to do content wise, when we're going to, join up, here at the farm. So it's, I'm here a lot though. I mean, literally I can drive home like I probably will this afternoon. I'll drive home, maybe come back in 2 days, and I'll be here for 2 weeks. You just have to get back to the office once in a while and make sure that the problems that have piled up that you've put off during the rut, you can.
We know that all too well.
Yeah, we just got back, so we see them. They're stacked high. Yeah, honestly, Bill, I don't think people realize that because they're so used to.
Well, from your content, you would never be able to tell. I'm like, these guys are out here every single day. I thought the house was like down the street.
Yeah,
I did.
Yeah. No, and it takes a little bit of organizing to try to keep steady content coming out, even when you're not here.
Yeah.
You can stockpile some stuff, film some things ahead and so forth, and you can edit them and work them up when you're back home again in the home office.
Bill, when you bought that farm, I know you were talking about kind of the challenge in finding land when the demand was so high and the inventory was so low. Did you have any insight on the previous owners and hunting on that, or was it kind of flying blind?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit flying blind, but I know not everybody. I know a very high percentage of the people in this part of the state. I'm fourth generation on both sides of my family in this county.
Okay.
So, that takes me through, I'm probably related to anybody that's been here for more than a couple of generations. I'm probably related to them. And, so I went through a lot of relationships, as far as like, talking with people, trying to find the certain farms that I wanted to buy. I mean, there were probably 15 that I had in mind that I would love to own one of these 15 because I understood the neighborhoods and I knew, what the upside potential was in those areas. And, I worked my way through all of those and there was no sellers.
Yeah.
I thought at some point that I thought I had one lined up at one point and then it fell through. So I just kind of gave up on it. And I said, well, I'll just stick with my lease. If that falls apart, I'll just hunt public land, because there's some decent public land here. It's not great, but it's at least fun. I mean, you're going to be deer hunting.
Yep.
And then one of the guys up in this area that I know pretty well, he called me and said, hey, I just saw the realtor pounding a for sale sign on such and such farm. And I said, well, what do you know about that? He doesn't live too far from here. So I don't know too much about it. And, as far as like the hunting practices and so forth. And I didn't really know anybody that hunted this area or was living, close to this either. And so I came and looked at it with the realtor and there was no buck sign on the farm. I mean, no rubs, no scrapes. I mean, very few tracks. It was a cattle farm. And, but it was just really, really pretty farm. Like you mentioned, and I thought, well, even if it's an average out of the neighborhood, I'll be okay. Well, I think it was probably a little bit even below average, neighborhood because right from the beginning, there weren't very many mature deer in this area. And so either way, like I said, I'm not going to complain about it because I'm happy I bought it. It's a beautiful farm and it'll be a nice legacy for our family, you know, if I can hold on to it. So it's, but sometimes you just have to buy something.
Yeah.
You don't get to pick. But again, if I had more options, like if I was just saying, I want to buy a great whitetail farm in Iowa, I wouldn't have bought this one.
Sure.
You know, if all I wanted was a great whitetail farm, I would have been down in the area where you guys were hunting.
Yeah.
That's where I'd be buying.
Yeah, but there was more to it. I mean, your family history in the area, and clearly, that's you wanted to get there.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, my mom and dad are still alive here.
Exactly.
Just a little ways down the road from the farm. So there were a lot of really good reasons to get back here. And I love the bluffs. You know, I love the Mississippi River. You know, I grew up out there hunting ducks and, you know, so it's just a really cool area.
Yeah.
But it's not the world's greatest deer hunting. Well, it's not even the state's best deer hunting.
Yeah.
By any stretch.
So, Bill, I mean, of course, we're all always looking. I mean, is there a world where you're like, you know, would trade this one out for another farm to expedite the process? I know it's hard to trade away the work you put into it and maybe not get its fullest value, but
I don't know that I would. You know, I've had people ask me that. There's maybe a couple of farms I'd consider trading it for. It's just stuff doesn't change hands here.
Yeah.
Really?
And again, that's another difference between northern Iowa and southern Iowa is the velocity of transactions is way higher down there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, gosh, I could have put together before I left down there, that farm that I owned, I could have put together probably 2,500 acres contiguous.
Wow.
And starting with 125 acres.
Yeah.
You know, so there was a lot of stuff changing hands there. And you just don't see that in this part of the state. You know, it's very rarely to even get a listing in this part of the state.
What about with the recent change where they tightened the noose, I guess, on like the non-resident loophole?
Oh yeah, for party hunting.
Yeah, I mean, I know statewide, some of the residents we know out there said, yeah, we know quite a few non-residents that put their property up for sale for that reason. Did you guys see that up in northern Iowa?
There's probably not a lot of non-resident landowners up there.
Shockingly, the highest percentage, if not very, very high percentage of this is legacy land.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, you know, if very limited amount of this goes to outside of the state. It's what you find is these big dairies, you know, they've got to have places to put the manure. And it's like, I've got somebody coming in my driveway. Hold on, let me see what this is.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Rack Hub.
Well, dude, sheds are starting to hit the ground.
Yeah, and although we usually don't find many of them, we've done pretty well this season so far.
I would say for just, you know, a handful of walks, we've got a pile of sheds to show for it. So yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I mean, if shed season would end today, I think it was pretty successful.
So this year we're partnering with Rack Hub. It's an antler mounting system for your sheds.
Yeah, and obviously people have watched our podcast. We've got this massive pile of sheds that are on the table at all times, but you guys took the time to set up Wide Boy Shed on the R1, which is a really cool way to now have that thing right off to my left-hand side during the podcast.
So some of these sheds just call for a little bit more appreciation, I guess. So rather than being on a pile on the table, you know, we're going to mount them on the wall, and they look awesome. So
yeah. And so if anybody wants to try Rack Hub, you can use the code HUNTR10, HUNTR10 at rackhub.com to get 10% off your order.
Use Rack Hub to make the most of your shed season.
Where were we before I ran off there?
I think you were just talking about that most of that land in that area is legacy.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. It's pretty tough to buy it here, and a lot of it, the big dairies, they end up wanting to buy what they can get their hands on because, or even the guys that are feeding pigs. Yep. They want to have places to put manure, and surprisingly, that drives some of the land value here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not, I won't say the pure recreational land.
Yeah.
You know, falls into that category, but it's surprising how these bigger farmers here keep trying to buy more and more because they have to have, in order to expand their herds or to do whatever they're going to do, they got to have someplace to put the manure.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's a whole different way of thinking on those kind of property values and things up there. And yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of us are probably just naive to, you know, it's Iowa, it's a big buck state. Like there should be, you know, big deer everywhere. Thus, every property is a recreational property.
Yeah, no, it's especially here. I'm going to get inside where it's even less
There you
extra
go.
noise.
I like that little bachelor pad there.
Oh,
Almost,
wow.
huh?
Here, we all thought you were living in that redneck shanty outside. Look at that.
Well, that's Jordan actually uses that for her office because she doesn't want to be cooped up in here. We built this kind of like I said on the cheap, and there's no windows or anything. It's just a building inside of a building.
That's all right.
Yeah, it serves the purpose. But
I saw Pam put a refrigerator in there, so you at least have food, right?
We have some food. That's the key. Food, a place to sleep, and maybe once in a while you can not use the outhouse.
Yeah, there you go. Oh man, yeah. I think though. I think a lot of people watching kind of this new development on your side, Bill, especially with Jordan being involved, and even like like obviously I think probably all of us watch like your burn you did through the timber and stuff, and it's like, okay, like what's this gonna look like? How's this gonna turn out? And those are cool things for I think people to see that you even as you're going into that, you're like, okay, this burn should help a lot. What are those results going to look like this year? Or is it going to take 2 years or 3 years before we start to see those benefits?
Yeah. And I think I'm learning a lot as I go along too, on some of this. And I've been managing property since 1995. So there's a lot of things that I've learned that are fairly easy to apply that most people know, but creating habitat, go beyond TSI and you look at what else can you do to create habitat.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's maybe the stuff that I'm learning the most about. It's like, what can you plant that the deer won't eat? What benefit do you get from a burn? Some of these things where, put it this way. If you think about, you got your food plots and maybe you got a limited number of food plot acres and the deer are coming into those plots, do you want their stomachs to be half full or 25% full when they get into your plots? I mean, everything does better if they're browsing their way through the day, because they're picking what's best for them out of what's available to them. And then your food plot serves as sort of like the last stop, in the cafeteria line. They're the last thing they're going to hit, and so they don't really even need your food plots if your habitat is good enough.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the challenge. How do you make this farm so good that every deer that lives on there reaches its potential?
Yeah.
And we never did that. Well, you saw my farm in Southern Iowa. I mean, there was a lot of deer. They were browsing pretty heavily. We had a lot of food plots, but I mean, the deer were so stressed. I shouldn't say that. They were always hungry.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like you could ever go to a food plot and there weren't, several deer out there.
Oh yeah.
And I can do that here. I mean, I can go to one of my food plots tonight and nothing will come out. I might hunt there 4 days in a row and nothing will come out. They just don't need that. My density is low enough. But anyway, the point is, what happens if you can create that environment where the browse is so good and so nutritious that they don't really need your food plots.
Yeah.
And the food plots just become like the bonus.
Yep.
What kind of deer can you grow? And maybe it won't be much different. Maybe they'll be the same size deer, but my gut tells me that, my average 5 or 6 year old buck is going to be bigger here than it was in Southern Iowa.
Interesting.
That is interesting. I almost wonder if, to me, I would say my Ohio farm is like in a more similar situation. In fact, it's a interesting contrast between, I don't know, a lot of the Midwestern states or places you might argue have pre-existing fantastic cover and food that is cover and stuff versus, the farm that Bill bought. It sounds like an old dairy farm or something. The farm that my parents own is an old Black Angus farm, and they pastured all the woods and everything like that. So there was an extreme lack of habitat. I mean, all the woods had been compacted, and the surrounding stuff was ag. And we have a bunch of acorns and stuff, so there wasn't necessarily a food shortage, but there was certainly a habitat shortage.
Yeah.
And a lot of our effort has been put into trying to, to reestablish a lot of that. But what I was going to say is to the food plot aspect of that, it's not that I feel, because we've done so much TSI and allowed a lot of that old field stuff to what's the word?
Go fallow.
To go fallow, to grow up, basically. I do think that they need the food plots from a food standpoint, especially after Thanksgiving, to refuel, and a standing grain source, especially once everything gets picked, is pivotal. But it really seems like almost as much of a social hub, or, like a thing that we're giving them as from a food element. Because the bucks just know that, and you can see in the demeanor of the does, like when they're out in that food plot, like, yes, they're eating, but they're also frolicking, and and they're playing, and they're happy to be there. They're like, okay, we came out of our hiding space and the bucks know that. Whether they know they're eating that or not is probably a factor, but they also just know, like, hey, that's where we go hang out over here, and that's where we go hang out over there.
Yeah, I just want them to have the best food possible, and I do think that if you create if you create better native browse, I think they have more diversity in their diet. They have a wider cross section. I think they're healthier. They're picking what they need. They're living the life that God intended for a deer to live, rather than if they're overpopulated and now they're just eating whatever they can find. So it'll be interesting. It's more like an experiment than anything else. If I keep my population low, I create the very best habitat possible, the best browse possible, what will these deer look like? And never had a chance to do that before, because every place I've either owned or had an active management role in had too many deer.
Yeah, I was going to say that, Bill. I remember that distinctly about your old farm, is like, even with all the TSI work that you do and standing grain, like every field was just getting pounded.
Yeah. And there was even worse on that. Well, there was a big cooperative farm that I was part of that was just about a mile down the road, and the deer density there was probably 175 deer per square mile, and there was a lot of habitat. There wasn't like a lot of open ag, but still, it's a really high density of deer. And they eat stuff in the timber that will never grow back again.
Yeah,
because anything that tastes good or that's palatable or useful to them, it's pretty much gone.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it won't come back. And so that was kind of what I thought. Well, I've got this farm that's at this low starting point. Not a lot of deer here. This is probably my one chance to find out, what that looks like. If you can hold a density that low and still get them to full age, what do those deer look like?
I guess, Bill, on that farm, and maybe comparing it to your last farm, like that big block of like contiguous timber that you've got and kind of in those ridges and stuff. I mean, are you seeing those deer move a lot different than you're used to, just because there's so much room and running those ridges and stuff?
Well, yeah, I mean, especially last year with all the acorns.
Yep.
They didn't even, there was millions and millions of acorns on the ground, because most of this timber that you see in those drone shots are oak trees. So there's just, last year there was so many acorns. They didn't eat anything. They didn't even touch my food plots. I had acre upon acre of standing corn that I just disked under when the spring came.
Wow.
Yeah, they just didn't care. They didn't need it. They didn't want it to come out.
Yep.
So anyway, the point is, in a situation like that, they became really hard to hunt, because they weren't stressed, and they only moved within the timber, and sometimes not very far from where they were bedding, because everything they wanted was right there. They didn't need to come out. Occasionally during the rut, you might get a buck, crossing following a brushy fence line or something, but even that was pretty limited, because so much of the overall behavior was taking place deep in the timber.
Yeah.
So if you didn't hunt deep in the timber, you just didn't see any deer, period.
Yep.
And that's so different from that farm in southern Iowa, because they were always hungry.
Yep.
So they were always coming out. So the fringes were always good. And that's definitely different here.
Boy, and that's tough to hunt too, because you got to get aggressive and push into that timber. And I mean, it's not safe by any means.
Yeah. And it's okay if you're just wanting to shoot any buck, but if you've got only one target on the whole farm, if he's not coming out, making himself vulnerable, he becomes pretty tough to kill, because now you have to go in after him, and that means, like you said, more risk. I like hunting them when they're they are taking some chances that I don't have to. And if the situation really favors the deer, kind of like this farm does right now, they don't have to take chances. They can just in the cover and everything they want is right there. They seem to know that somehow, instinctively. They seem to know that, where they're safest. And if they don't feel any stress and there's no urgency, for them to find a different food source, or the does are coming out to the fields, so the bucks have to come out to the fields. If none of that exists, then it's just a little bit of a different game. It's really weird. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Because, so much of my serious hunting has been in areas with quite a few deer.
Do you think with these next week or two coming up, you said you're going to go home and probably come back for 2 weeks. I would think that based on kind of the last does coming into estrus, as well as some of the food kind of going away, like that might be the best time for your farm from a setup standpoint.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why I'm going to get out of here for a little while and let everything freshen back up again.
Yep.
And then catch that second round, after most of the does have been bred. There's usually a really nice second bump in mature buck movement.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, like on the Southern Iowa farm, all that movement was toward food. But I think here it's going to still be back in the cover. It's just going to be more movement in daylight than what there has been, up until now.
What are you looking at for dates on that, Bill? Like roughly?
I always thought the 22nd through the 28th was pretty hard to beat.
Yeah.
But, I think clear up into December, we've seen pretty good rutting behavior clear or at least as far as like bucks moving clear into early December.
Yeah.
But you got to be in a state where you don't have the firearms pressure in order to see that.
Yeah.
Jeremy and I are giving each other eyes over here because, and the last thing you said there factors in. So I'm going back to our Illinois farm.
21st.
Well, so our time frame was Iowa. We left on the 7th, got in the night, like super late the night of the 7th. We hunted our farm in Illinois, the 8th, 9th, and 10th.
Mm-hmm.
And they were locked down, like pretty obviously, like we'd hear them snort wheezing in the thicket, but they'd never come out. The 1 and 2 year olds would be coming in and out. And I did see one of our shooters, like a, whatever he is, 7 or 8 year old, like super old, mid 60s type template.
Tank.
That's what we're hunting. That's who we're after. One of them. And we just ran out of time. And because we had to come home, the wives were, and work was, and everything. So we came home, and of course, those, whatever that was,
12th and 13th.
12th and 13th were money, right? And I'm sure they were, and we knew that it was, we're just, man, we got to get home. And so now I'm like looking pretty quickly for the next opportunity to go out. And as much as I would love for it to be early next week, leading up to the gun season, which in Illinois is, I think, the 22nd, like it's the following Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It's just not. It's going to be a washout, like 50s to 60s and rain every day.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Quest Hunt Co.
Man, it seems like as technology and social media and stuff just gets incorporated into our daily lives in the deer season more and more, it's like we're always looking for ways to just dial it back, spend more quality time with deer hunters, and really make deer hunting and deer camps great again.
Yeah, and I mean, we've all been part of that annual buck pull, whether it's at your camp or the local fire department, and we're trying to bring that feeling back with Quest Hunt Co. to be able to compete against other people in your state, but also be part of a national competition.
You can sign up in as many states as you want to enter deer that at the end are going to get scored, and you have an opportunity to win some big prizes. And there's an in-person banquet in February that Jeremy and I are going to be at where those prizes are going to get held out. I think we're going to do some sort of whatever, live podcast or speaking. We'll figure that out. But just looking forward to spending time with people who sign up for the tournament.
Yeah, so you can go to Quest Hunt Co. and sign up. Use the code HUNTR15 at checkout. They'll save you a little bit of money, and then hopefully we'll be able to see you in Missouri in February of 25 at the annual convention.
To make this season a quest.
I was kind of going through my brain there a little bit, and we were talking about the investment side, and then you mentioned the oaks and stuff up there. Is there a timber harvest in the future, you think?
I'm a little bit of a tree hugger when it comes to the oak trees.
Yep.
I don't care as much for the walnut as far as like wanting to see them because they don't offer a lot,
right?
Visually. But some of these big, beautiful oak trees, I really struggle with the idea of cutting those down.
Mm-hmm.
And there's enough walnut on here to warrant a harvest, but what did a guy tell me? I think it's like 8 or 9% a year, or 7 to 9% a year.
Yep.
Of value growth if you just leave them standing.
Yep.
And the bigger they get, the faster they appreciate, because the board footage starts going up faster as the log gets built.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really don't cut it when it comes to the walnut unless you need the cash, because it's sort of like having having that money in the bank at 9% or 8% or whatever it is if you don't cut them.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if I need the cash, I'll think about it, but probably not gonna do a bunch of cutting. I don't know. This place it's pretty special with the oak.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a lot of really good oak timber in Iowa anymore. There's a lot of kind of junky timber where it got over harvested, and then a whole bunch of other stuff comes in. So it's kind of cool to have a farm that has this much oak that and a lot of it's pretty good size.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Like, I remember one time guy came out and looked at a piece of property I had in Kentucky, and there's this giant red oak. I mean, I don't know. No way I could get my arms around it, right? Just an ancient tree. And I said, I'm just curious, like, what would a tree like that bring? And he said, probably about $400 or $500. And I was like, there's no way I would cut it for that.
Yeah.
It's like 100-year-old tree.
Right. If you had, 500 of them or something, maybe you'd cut 200 of them.
Right.
Yeah. It's, and obviously the walnut for what they produce from a aesthetic standpoint versus what they're worth. They're a lot more, I'd say, comfortable, if you want to call it that, for a target for cutting.
Yeah.
So I've cut walnut before on the Southern Iowa farm and a few other properties that I've owned, but I'm pretty slow on cutting down very much oak. And I know it needs to be done, and there's some areas where you don't have an understory because you've got such a heavy canopy. But for the few spots like that on the farm that have that much oak timber, I'm probably just going to be satisfied to let those areas be open.
Yep.
And who knows, maybe someday I'll change my mind if I get into the spot where I'm like, man, I got to have some cash. But like you said, I mean, I could go out here, cut down all the oak on this whole place, all the marketable oak, and you'd have some cash. But then what have you got on this farm? It's just too hard on the life cycle of a property like this to harvest it.
Yeah.
Too heavily.
Yeah.
When you guys were doing TSI, did you do any select clear cuts?
Well, that's about all we did, because, again, you're trying to work around the oak trees, and you had to find holes, because you don't make any change in the habitat if you don't create a hole. You've got an opening in the canopy. Just kind of randomly cutting down junk trees really doesn't benefit really anything.
Right.
So you find those spots where there aren't very many oak, and then you find a way to drop, the non-quality trees into those holes, and then you start filling those holes up from every direction, with your, I call them junk timber, whatever you want to call it. But so then you just move on to the next spot like that, because it's just going through and cutting out, let's say, an elm tree that's next to an oak, and there's like, you might as well do it. Maybe it helps the oak a little bit, but you don't really benefit your habitat unless you make an opening. So we were pretty hard on it whenever we found a spot that we could, make a hole. We would dump everything we could into that hole and then move on.
Yep, makes sense. Well, we were talking, I guess, before that about the kind of that second rut, and we were talking dates around the 20. I was leading up there to the 22nd, 23rd. Fortunately, unfortunately for us in Illinois, it's paired with the opener of gun season, and it looks like a murderous cold front. I mean, some deer are gonna die, and I guess I'm at the mercy of, you have to hunt the front, but it's also gun season. So I mean, what do you do? I'm not gonna just sit it out, I don't think.
Did I lose you guys?
Nope,
we're
got
still
us.
Yeah. No, I think you have to hunt the phases of the rut regardless, and I even think that any rut phase trumps the weather patterns. I think prior to the serious part of the rut, the weather patterns have the bigger impact on what the deer are doing.
Mm-hmm.
You might get more daylight movement when it's cooler during certain, rut phases, but they're still going to breed. So they're still going to do the same stuff. It's just whether they do as much of it in daylight or more in dark. So, no matter what the situation is, there's certain dates you just need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality of it.
Let me ask you this, because it's not something we have a ton of experience with, just by nature of what we've been able to plant in the past. But like I know in Iowa and in Illinois and probably some others, Ohio, I'm sure you can do it. A big strategy is mowing corn. So whether it's like pulling a blind in there or, whatever, however you're going to use it, it's just something that's fairly foreign to Jeremy and I as East Coast guys, I guess. And I just planted my very first corn this year and it failed. So if I was going to look at mowing corn ever, like for the first time this year, we have some on our Illinois farm that we had the farmer plant that I'm like, okay, do I mow this? And so in my mind and in Jeremy's too, we're trying to figure out like, what is the strategy for that? If there is one, does it correlate with those 22nd to 28th rut dates, or do we?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like a November 28th on kind of a, and I've had really good success with the older, more mature bucks coming back to food right at the end of November, because they still think there maybe is a few does maybe that will come to the food too. So they've got that excuse to be there, but they're really trying to catch back up again.
Yeah.
And if you look at what they do and how they live and how they have to behave during the rut, they're hungry. They've got to get back to it. And, soybeans will work too. It doesn't have to be corn. Clover will work if it's not withered down too much, from the frosts. Anything that really allows them to really get serious about eating. Corn tends to be a good draw because they like it when it gets cold. And generally you're looking for, after the rut, that cold, that kind of is a trigger for them too. But they're going to be there even if it's not cold.
Yeah.
They need that. They need it. They know they need it, and they think there's maybe a doe that might be hanging around there that still hasn't been bred, So it's a really good pattern. As far as like the knocking the corn down thing, it's the honest truth about that is that it makes a difference. The deer would rather eat corn off the ground than to eat it off the standing stalk.
Sure.
So that's why people do it, is because it just makes the corn easier for the deer to access, and then therefore they're more likely, to use that plot. They might walk around your cornfield and go into your beans, but if you knock the corn down, they probably will stop and eat the corn. It's really what I've found to.
Yeah. Well, I think, we would agree. I mean, I think, and I guess I would throw the question back to you, because like I said, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but it's like, it sure seems like if they had the option of mowed corn over any other food plot, they're going to choose the mowed corn.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting because temperature plays a role. When it's a little bit warm, they'd eat the beans instead. Not even a little bit warm. I mean, like seasonal.
Yeah.
I think they prefer beans, but when it gets cold, they absolutely prefer corn. So
interesting.
The late muzzleloader season in a lot of the Midwestern states, if you've got corn, you're going to have, pretty much your choice of whatever bucks are in the area, because when it gets cold like that, they're going to corn because of all the carbohydrates in it.
Yeah. Do you think when it's kind of that just, seasonal weather around the beans, they're focusing on protein and stuff then, Bill?
I don't know what it is. Maybe they just like it better.
Sure. Yeah.
Maybe they don't feel that same urgency to get the carbs, and it's like, man, I really like beans. The deer on this farm prefer beans to corn 4-to-1.
Interesting.
I mean, my beans, I can't hardly grow beans here, but I can grow corn and they won't even touch it. Now that, I mean, literally, I can take you right now. We could walk around the corner and I could show you 200 plus bushel per acre corn plots that have only had a few ears around the edge picked at.
Wow.
There's no way they're going to eat it all. No way.
Yeah.
And that's not even tons of acres. That's just a few acres, 2, 3, 4 acres. They'll never eat it all. But my beans, they'll be gone within a month. and maybe it's just these deer, but that's kind of what I saw in Southern Iowa too, is they really like beans.
Yeah.
And they would prefer corn when it's really cold because of the carbs. But prior to that, I just think they like the taste of the beans maybe.
Yeah.
What would you call really cold?
Well, I think 20 degrees below norm is really cold, maybe even 15, so if the normal temperature right now is 40, then 25 would be really cold.
Yeah.
But excuse me, I don't think this time of the year it triggers as much. It's that late season. It's really what it is. The first really cold snap, first really hard cold snap, usually comes toward the end of December in this area. That really gets them going. It kind of like almost scares them a little bit. And they're like, here comes winter. I better get busy. And they'll be out eating an hour before dark, whereas the rest of the fall, if it's just seasonal temperatures, the rest of the, late fall, early winter, they might not come out until after dark, right on through. But you get that first really hard snap, then they're all out.
Yep.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, that has me almost considering, like, before our conversation, I'm going out on the 21st or 22nd, and it's going from highs in the high 50s, like to 60, and rain, to
high 30s,
highs of 40, I think, highs of 40 and lows of 20. So, I mean, definitely a front, definitely a cold snap, but I'm on the fence of, like, on those dates, I'm still probably hunting, I think, rut patterns, like late cruising bucks. And we have the option of, I've got a 3-acre cornfield next to a 3-acre bean field, and they both look great. I'm like, I could mow some of the corn and move a blind and do this or that. Or sounds like maybe I would be best to spend more time on the beans in that condition.
I mean, you can let them decide, I guess, when it boils down to it. You could knock down a little bit of corn and the fringe of the beans, then put your blind right there where you could cover them both, I suppose.
Sure.
But there's not a hard science to this either. Sometimes it's just, you just kind of have to
see what they're doing,
see what they're doing, and just react to what the deer are doing. And that's why I like putting blinds on trailers, is because I'll wait, I'll get the blind out there, and then I'll let the deer get used to it. And then once they tell me what they're interested in, I can move the blind around a little bit, and they don't freak out.
Yeah,
that's huge.
No, I think that's a big one. Yeah, I think it is kind of the weird preference or whatever it might be on a farm. Like, I mean, you hear people talk all the time about planting brassicas and like deer don't touch brassicas. And, I've got farms where in early October they're mowing them down, and maybe that's because of the lack of other food options as well.
And of moisture, of water.
Yeah, obviously when we're in these droughts, they're definitely pounding them because of the water moisture. But, I think the beans especially, because a lot of people ask us, like, well, what should I plant, beans or corn? Boy, if you've got low deer densities, like where I'm at in Kentucky, I'm planting beans to try to build that herd, right? The corn is more of like sustaining the carbohydrates into the winter, but I'm planting beans for the summer, and then I get the benefit, like you said, Bill, at least through November into early December, depending on how hard they hit them.
Yeah. No, I think the other thing you can do too with beans that you can't do with corn is you can broadcast your brassicas in there in late August. And then as the leaves are falling off, the brassicas are coming up through the beans. And if I have thin spots, I literally go in there with the drill, the no-till drill, and drill right through the beans. And it's shocking how well the beans can handle that kind of abuse and not kill them. And then you got brassicas coming up right in your beans, and it's pretty awesome. So, beans do give you that opportunity to do 2 layers of food, whereas corn, really doesn't give you that option.
Yeah, they definitely both have their place. Like I've always, or I just started with beans anyways, and I had a lot of success with that.
It's easier to grow beans too.
It seems that way. Yep.
They're a lot cheaper too.
Yeah, a lot cheaper.
Yep. And all the benefits that you mentioned, I was like, and I noticed an immediate benefit, like with our herd. I was like, man, we're holding more deer like in December and stuff, and they just seem to be building a life around it, but with the corn now, it seems like almost a second element where it's 2 things. Is I can have micro attraction. I'm like, I think that certain times of the year it is more attractive, especially if you mow it. And it also gives you, unlike any other food plot, it gives you and you might say sorghum, I know you've been doing that this year, an edge component. I'm like, I can use that now to add a more design to a big open area.
Yeah. And the other thing that's nice about corn too, if the plot's big enough, is you can sneak through it, to get in and out of your area. And I've used corn that way quite a bit too. It's hard to sneak through a bean field. It's hard to sneak through a sorghum field, but it's pretty easy to sneak through a cornfield.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, I think that it depends on the equipment that you have for a lot of people. I know you broadcasted I
broadcasted mine this year,
and
it did terribly.
Yeah,
didn't do well.
It
grew stalks, but I was on the verge of late. For whatever reason, I felt like I had plenty of time. I was thinking like a bean planting time frame, and then I was like, oh no, these need to be in the ground, especially with
way earlier
the rain that was coming. So we disked, and I just elected to broadcast, and the stalks grew, and I had some ears grow, but it was I don't think as much germinated as I was hoping for, and the stuff
corn is way more fickle about seed depth than beans are. You can throw beans on top of the ground and they'll find a way, but the corn has to be at a standard depth.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And ideally they're all at the same depth so that they germinate, they come up together, and they tassel together.
That's right.
Corn is a little bit, you have to be almost a farmer to do corn really well, or you got to spend some time figuring corn out. It's not, you can't just like throw and grow corn.
Yeah.
Did you guys do yours with do you own a corn planter, like a 2-row planter or something?
A 6-row corn planter.
6-row. Holy cow.
He's making easy work of it.
Wow. That's one pass and you're done.
I bought what I could find. I wanted a 4-row.
Yeah.
I wanted a 4. The problem with 4-row planters is most of them are on a 36-inch row, and I wanted 30-inch row, and I couldn't find a 4-row on a 30 that was at the local auctions. And I found a 6-row on 30, and I thought, it's cheap enough. I'll just buy this.
Good enough.
But, there's a whole lot of stuff you can do, with even like you say, you put sorghum on 30-inch rows, and you can plant a whole lot of stuff in there with it. I mean, you could put corn or beans in there with it. You could put brassicas in there with it, because now you're getting the sunlight in.
Yeah.
So there's flexibility with how you approach the different things that you plant. I mean, we could obviously spend a day talking about that. You just have to be open, I guess, to experimenting and messing around. But there are certain rules with growing, certain crops that you can't violate those rules or you won't get anything.
Yeah.
So that's I mean, I grew up on a farm, and I've been around farmers my whole life, so it's kind of a little bit second nature to grow this stuff. But even at that, I'm still learning a little bit every year, about what you can do in some of these food plots, and some of it just relates to the deer density too.
Yeah.
There's certain things that, like sorghum does really well in certain situations because of the deer won't eat it during the summer, or you go through the list of the different plantings and how the deer relate to them. That has as much to do with your success as the soil component part.
Mm-hmm. How are your soils there? I mean, is it pretty good?
It's pretty good. I mean, northern Iowa, part of the reason why the land is more expensive here than other parts of the state is because the soil is generally really good.
Yep.
So even though this is recreational land with a lot of hill country, my CSRs are still pretty solid. They're at least comparable, if not better than some of the better ground in southern Iowa. Even though I'm just in the bluffs and the hills.
Right.
But you get out in the flats, and it's like, I mean, there's a reason why they're paying $15,000 an acre for that stuff. I mean, it'll grow 300 bushel per acre corn.
Yeah. Well, and that ties back to a lot of your native browse and habitat you're talking about. Is if you've got good base soil for that native habitat, the natural stuff coming out is super high quality. Yeah,
and I think then if all you do, you just have to encourage it. You do the TSI, you burn, you get rid of the junk, you open it up and let something fresh come in there that the deer are more likely to eat. They're not going to eat multiflora rose and gooseberries and bush honeysuckle, and you go through the list. But if you get rid of that stuff, whatever comes in to replace them might be something they'll eat. It's like, you're removing stuff that they won't. So the worst case scenario is something else comes in that they won't eat. But more than likely, you're going to get a flush of stuff that they really, benefit from.
What about switchgrass? You going to put any grass on the farm?
I planted hundreds of acres of switchgrass down in southern Iowa on one of the farms that I was a part owner of, and the deer only just traveled through it. They didn't really live in it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, I know it's kind of trendy and people talk about doing it, and I don't know, maybe in certain situations it's the best option. But I would, like 10 years after you plant switchgrass, you're probably going to need to, reseed it or do something. It kind of has a life of its own. It doesn't live forever. So now 10 years are up and I've got to replant my switchgrass. I could have 10-foot tall oak trees if I just planted acorns.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's what I do. I mean, I don't plant switchgrass. I plant permanent habitat. And then, by the time the switchgrass would be up for replanting, I've got plenty of permanent habitat coming in.
That does seem pretty abundantly clear at this point that I killed this buck on a CR. No, it's a switchgrass one. Like a lot of the, big coves and pockets were planted to switchgrass, and like the movement that we saw there was almost exclusively on the edge. Like I never saw a deer in the switch. It did seem like the biggest benefit that it offered was it buffered all of the timber. So I felt like they would feel safer to bed closer even to the edges of the timber and stuff.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. It creates it's sort of like I used to leave the corn on my Southern Iowa farm standing until, late December or whenever. Then I'd, pay the farmer I just used custom farming and I would just say, okay, come and get it now. Well, they may not have lived in the corn necessarily, but it made a really safe edge. So there was a lot of movement around the edge of the timber because the deer didn't see the danger right there lurking like they would if the corn had been combined. So that's kind of what switchgrass can do that for you too, I'm sure, is create that security so that the edge of the timber becomes more attractive to them.
Yeah.
I think they bed out in it during the summer. I think they like it during the summer. But I just don't feel like during the fall, in my experience, that they really used it that much other than just to travel through.
Yeah. We had like one hill, and we don't have any real proof of it, but we've got one spot in the Illinois farm that's about a 7 or 8 acre warm season grass, and it's south facing. And I wonder as we get towards those winter months and stuff, if they'll lay in that to really soak up the sun with that thermal.
I would say so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that'd be good for finding shed antlers, come spring.
Exactly. Those are the cases.
There's a couple
where
little islands in it too, like little small shrub trees and stuff. There's enough to break it up.
Well, yeah. To your point, Bill, I guess my biggest thing is like when you see these like C monocultures of it, I don't think deer like that. I think they want brushy pockets and stuff.
They'll live there if there's nothing else.
Right. Yeah.
And it's sort of a quick solution. Maybe within 2 years, you've got habitat, quote unquote habitat. I would rather plant something permanent and then, 10 years later, I've got something permanent rather than, having something temporary that I need to replant. And maybe I'm just biased. Like I said, I planted hundreds of acres of it, and I just didn't really see the benefit of it.
Sure.
And I just won't ever do it again, I guess.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to, and again, you understand that anybody that's watched deer, and especially mature bucks, is like, wherever they're bedding, they want to be able to get up and browse around. Well, if they get up in the middle of a switchgrass field, there is no browse. Like they aren't browsing on anything. If they've got, fallow fields and shrubbery and little oaks grown, like they've got browse, right? They can bounce around. They can hit that stuff.
No, I agree.
It's an interesting tool for sure. Cause like that makes a lot of sense. Like you're not going to catch me planting and I'm having this like on a year to year, about December every year, I'm like, okay, I start going back to the farm projects and looking at all the, wasted acreage stuff that's old pasture and stuff. And some we've burned and killed the grasses out. I've tried to spray like an October type of thing. Other areas we've planted like smaller pockets of switch and stuff. It seems like there is a use for it, but it's not to create habitat. It's to buffer existing timber and to create visual barrier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that, like, let's say, for example, on my farm that I've done 30 plus acres of acorn planting, and they're starting to come in pretty well, but it's not going to be a monoculture.
Right.
There's other stuff that's going to come in that's going to, work its way into those plantings as the oak trees start to come up. You'll get other stuff coming in with them. Some of that could be switchgrass if you plant it right.
Mm-hmm.
Where
sure,
maybe your switchgrass is sort of your base, and then you're planting your other habitat types into that, or making it. Maybe the switchgrass becomes the fill-in.
Yep.
Until some of the other stuff starts to mature and take its place. I think that's a good role for it. But as far as like saying, oh, I just want to have a bunch of switchgrass, I think that's in my mind, that's the wrong strategy for creating habitat long term.
Mm-hmm. So, Bill, what's the chances you guys catch up with the Jordan buck this year?
Oh, I don't know. He's still here. I got a picture.
How big
of him.
is he? Or we don't want to say.
No, I mean, I'm not trying to guess. I'd say he's 170 plus.
The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Sever.
Well, one of the biggest things that we always talk about is what our arrow setups are. And this year we're shooting the Sever broadheads. I think we're both shooting the new 2-inch titanium broadhead. And so, we're huge proponents of expandables. And I know we've had this argument back and forth with people, but we're
right and you're wrong, and you just need to accept it.
We just want to have a giant wound that pumps out blood. That's the bottom line.
We build our arrow setups and shoot bows, to maximize penetration, and we shoot broadheads that are going to give us the best blood trails, the most hemorrhage possible. And so part of those setups is we're also shooting the Easton arrows here coming up pretty soon. So we've shot the Victory in the past, and there's all kind of great arrow shafts on the market, but we're looking for a whole system from broadhead to arrow components to the arrow shaft itself. And, the more we look at some of these Easton shafts and the components that go with them, that setup's going to be really deadly for us.
Yeah, I'm actually using the Easton traditional axis right now in my traditional setups for both my recurve and my longbow. I've got a 100-grain brass insert on those, and then obviously I'm using a fixed blade broadhead on those specific shafts.
Right on.
So, but yeah, our goal is always to be shooting the best broadhead that we think is going to be the most lethal for our setups. We've done plenty of research. We believe in the Sever broadheads, and we hope you would check them out at Sever Broadheads as well. Okay, so you think he's 170 plus?
Yeah, I got a pretty good idea where he's living. I got another picture of him last night, and but he's pretty nocturnal. He's a 5-year-old deer, and those tend to be maybe one of the hardest year classes to kill. Buck, 5-year-old. I think they're easier at 6. They're for sure easier at 3, maybe easier at 4. 4 and 5-year-old bucks they can be pretty tough. But he was very daylight active last year on the cameras, and this year there's almost no daylight pictures.
Wow.
I think his range has moved a little bit, or his core has. And I think he's kind of shrunk his movements somewhat. So, I don't really have I don't want to go into where I think he's living, put it that way.
Yeah. I mean, what's the strategy like right now, Bill? Are you out there moving cameras around, or what's reading sign? What are you doing?
I'm just waiting now. I've only got a certain number of places where I can hunt that deer effectively.
Yeah.
Where I can get in and out without him probably knowing that I'm there. So I've just got to be patient and hope that he comes through one of those spots when I'm there. And it's kind of low odds. I mean, again, I got a sense of maybe where he's living, and I could try to go in after him, but then you maybe get a good hunt.
Right.
Maybe you didn't. But the odds are a lot higher that you're going to spook him. I'd rather keep him here and keep him, whatever amount of daylight movement he's got going, keep him on that. And then thinking that this second half of the rut, like we've talked about, he's the kind of buck that I think is going to be more vulnerable than he was prior to the peak of breeding. Because I'm pretty sure I had him at pretty close range on the 6th. There aren't that many mature bucks on this farm, but there was one that had a doe, and I was hunting on the fringe of his core, or what I think is, and there was a buck that all day long was down in this little thick spot with the really deep grunts, and other bucks were staying away from there, and it's okay, there aren't that many mature bucks, so it was probably him, and that was on the 6th where he was already locked down, and not to say that he wouldn't come loose, and go look for another doe, but I think that when most of the does are bred, as long as he doesn't have any sense that I'm hunting him, I think he might move a little bit more in daylight.
I agree. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We've had that discussion here when we're talking about these mature bucks getting on does, and boy, it seems like even when the first does are coming into estrus late October through that first part, they're just not working hard. You don't see that 5-year-old out there just busting a field, really trying to put on a full chase. You just see them locked up.
Yeah, and I think that they do. I think what happens a lot of times is they steal those does at night
Yep.
from bucks that did all the work to, to find that doe and get her corralled.
Yep.
But I've seen a few older bucks during that time frame really go to work, trying to find a doe. So it still is. I think that's when, if you're hunting one specific buck, that time frame from about the 25th through the end of October can be really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
But after that, it gets a little bit sketchy because then they're moving more. They're maybe not moving more, but they're not necessarily at home.
Yeah.
And when they do find a doe, they're going to be tied up for at least a day, if not longer. And then it shouldn't be that hard for them to get the next one because they can just steal her from their buck. And that's where everybody thinks, oh, they got to find the next doe. They don't have to find the next doe.
Mm-mm.
They just need to find the next buck that found the next doe.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and kick him off and take her.
Just steal the doe away.
Yeah. Which is probably why this next little period you talk about is so critical, because he does have to work because the next buck doesn't have the doe.
No, that's right. And they've still got a little bit of a taste for it, for the rut. And a lot of the younger bucks have given up and they're on food and they're not paying any attention to the rut anymore.
Yeah.
But those older ones, they just still are like, okay, there's still some business that's yet to be, completed here. I need to make my last rounds for a few more days. And a lot of people I talk to say the same thing, man. Around Thanksgiving, they see bucks that they've never seen before because they're covering a lot more ground.
Yep. Yep. That seems to be it.
Is the Jordan buck? I'm sorry. Is the Jordan buck the only one that you would kill, or I know the fat buck is on the radar?
We just really don't have hardly any fully mature deer. There's one other, an 8-pointer that he wouldn't score a lot, but he's probably 6+ on age, and I definitely would shoot him. So either one of those two would be fine, and I've got enough tags I could shoot them both in theory. But either one of them, I'm going to be really proud of. So that's kind of the way I look at this next stretch. And the beauty of it is their ranges more or less overlap. So I could run into either one of them in the spots that I'll be spending most of my time.
Yep. Yeah. There you go.
How old is the fat buck?
Oh gosh, there's a question. I mean, who knows really? He could be 7 or 8, he's old.
Okay.
And I wish that he wouldn't have disappeared, because I really wanted to, to stick with him for the fall. And he was in one area, and then the next day I caught him on 2 cameras, and the farthest camera was a mile from where he'd been spending all of his time up to that. So it's sort of like he was there up until early October, and then he was just gone. And I picked him up as he was leaving. Basically I picked him up on 2 different cameras the same night as he was leaving the farm, I guess. And the second camera was a mile away from where he'd spent all of September and early October.
Wow.
Jeez.
Well, hopefully,
I don't know what causes. It's weird that they make that range that time, and some bucks do that. They have like I call it a fall range, but it only is a temporary one, and then the early October comes and they're just gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's the more I learn about it, the more experiences I have, the more I realize that so many of the preconceived or assumptions that we have just don't always hold up.
Yeah.
Every buck is different.
Yep, for sure. And every property seems to respond differently. And yeah, that's what makes it exciting, right? If we just kind of knew it all and pattern them all, it'd be, we'd have a full wall of them, and
it'd be like programming a computer.
Exactly.
You put certain, you're going to get a certain output, and you don't get that with whitetails. I mean, you do on younger ones, but you get into the older class, and every one of them is different.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully you've got more ingress on your farm than egress, especially.
I don't even want to get started on that, because we could talk for days. But the interestingly, and you guys know Steve Hansen?
Yep, I know Steve.
Yeah, down in Southern Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I don't.
Yeah. Is that right? Do you know him?
I do.
He was a big outfitter down there in that area where my farm was.
Yep. That's how I ran into him when I was down there around you.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought over the years that, man, I'm not getting any surprise bucks in the rut. Like, what is this whole story about? Where are these rut roamers? I never get them. Never. And So I was talking to Steve one day, and he runs over thousands of acres, with his outfitting business. I said, how many strangers do your clients kill? And he said, almost none. I'm like, yeah, what's the deal with that? Everybody talks about these bucks that are out roaming around during the rut, covering all this ground, and they have these new deer come in, and I'm sure they exist.
What gives?
But they don't exist to the extent that I wish that they did. Because I've never shot a buck that I didn't have some history with in gosh, I don't know, 20 years.
Yeah.
And I could try to figure out if I have or not. I don't think so. I think every buck that I've killed in the past 20 plus years, maybe more than that, 30 plus years, maybe, no, not that long. Let's say 25 years.
Yeah.
Deer that I knew about.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, it's misidentification, right? It's a deer from a year or even 2 years previous that comes back, and they're like, whoa, look at this new deer. And it's not. It's just he's older and looks different.
Well, that buck you killed, man, was that one of the last years on your Southern Iowa piece? That one, it was probably, what was he, a 5-year-old? And you're like, just hadn't run cameras in that part of the farm, and he just blew up.
Yeah, no, he was there the year before. He looked really good. And I ran cameras there specifically trying to find him back. And I didn't get him, throughout, September or early October. So I just kind of gave up on him. I thought, well, either he's dead or he moved on. Well, then he showed up on the 23rd of October.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that he wasn't, right around the corner someplace I didn't have a camera, but he was one that, I called him a surprise. He was only a surprise because I hadn't found him yet that year. That deer had been on the farm, ever since I could identify him, as probably a 2-year-old. He had been there, and I could find him every year on camera. It's just that year I hadn't found him on camera, so I called him a surprise buck. But no, I don't know what the mechanical or the behavioral mechanism is for a buck to come onto this farm. Maybe I don't know where they'd come from.
Well, what I was getting at was not necessarily like a rut buck as much as it is food.
And I could get that. And I did, I think, get that sometimes on that Southern Iowa farm too, because there was more hunting pressure around me during the firearm season. I think they got ran in, and then they found my food plots and they stayed.
Yep.
But that could happen here too. I could end up getting some deer, run in and then find the food. It's just that's been an interesting point for me over the years is just really how few mature bucks.
We can confirm that too, Bill. That is a product, I think, of that's a pre-cell cam mindset. It's like now we might have thought we knew before all the bucks that were there, but now like we know.
Yeah.
And they just don't they don't show up.
Even the misconceptions, like the old Outdoor Life magazine articles that you'd read, 30 years ago, and these, mysterious ghost buck, he just shows up out of the vapor, and they're one step ahead of us because they've got us outsmarted. And, all of that is just a product of us not understanding deer well enough.
Right. Yeah.
And they really aren't, how do you say it delicately? They aren't that smart.
Yeah.
They're just nocturnal.
They're just goats that live in the woods is how we like to put it.
Yeah. If they're moving in daylight, we're going to kill them.
Yeah.
They just aren't. And so that they're not smart enough to avoid us, to outwit us. They just aren't moving in daylight.
Mm-hmm.
And they aren't taking risk. Maybe they move a little bit slower than a doe might or whatever. But, if they were moving, as much in daylight as a doe does, we'd kill them all.
I mean, that's how I had to explain it to my 8-year-old the other day when we were sitting in the blind, and he's like, I can't believe we didn't see anything. I said, here's the thing, man. Like, here we are out here. It's about to get dark, right? It's our bedtime. They're just waking up, right?
Yeah.
When we wake up in the morning and we're ready to go, they're going to bed. I said, so we just keep missing each other. And he's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think they get a little bit of pressure on them, and then they're even more nocturnal.
Yeah.
So their tendency is to be nocturnal, though. I mean, it's rare when you get a mature buck with very much daylight activity, built into him. So that's what keeps them alive. And that's why I like those older ones, like the 6-year-old plus. because in my limited experience with that age class of bucks, they tend to be more daylight active than the younger ones.
Yep.
I mean, 3-year-olds are going to be, they're going to be everywhere.
Yeah.
But the 4s and 5s tend to be more nocturnal. Then they hit 6, and it almost seems like they go back to how they lived when they were 3. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's hard for people to just fathom that, and maybe right now is a little different, but through most of the year and most of the season, that, those deer are just in a bed and they get up and they stretch and they browse around and they lay back down, like they move with the wind. Like they're just, they're just there during daylight hours, and then they move during the night.
We are there for such a limited amount of time in their scope of their life and their mindset. It's like we show up and we're like, okay, time to move.
Yeah.
It's 4 o'clock, 4:30.
It's the last hour. Let's go.
Let's go.
Well, before the trail cameras, we had no idea what was even out there.
None.
Yeah.
Yeah, no idea.
That changed a lot of things as far as like even knowing how deer behave. Some people don't like trail cameras, and I can understand that mindset. But what I do like about them is I've learned a lot about deer, and it's not stuff that I was learning any other way. It wasn't like I was picking it up watching videos or reading magazines, because there was so much misconception, and now the cameras just show you what the deer do.
Yep. Yeah, it's the look behind the curtain for sure.
Pretty
cool.
Have you run any? Are you all SD cameras, Bill? No.
Well, I started working with Stealth, and they sent me some cell cameras to play with. And
oh, cool.
That's been beneficial from the standpoint of, it's not going to make, my quest for a certain buck maybe that much easier. But what it does is it teaches me a lot about how deer respond to the different phases of the rut with respect to movement.
Yep.
Yes.
When I didn't have any cameras out there through most of the hunting season, I didn't know exactly when they shut down. But when you got the cell cameras, you can get up in the morning, and I just dump my photos at midnight every day, and get up in the morning and go, wow, they really moved, yesterday, or they only moved after dark or whatever it is. And I never would have known that during the season, because I'm not going to run all over the farm pulling SD cards out when I'm trying to. So even though you have to be careful how you use cell cameras, from an ethical standpoint, and to each their own.
Yeah.
But there's no replacing that information or that knowledge of what you can gain by just seeing what the deer actually do.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Well, welcome to the, and at the same time, be careful, because we're, what are we, 4, 5, 6 years into cell cameras, and it's like, seems like there's a whole thing there where, and you're probably in a better place than we were. Number one, just with your lifestyle and hunting up until this point, but also just, it caught Jeremy and I, and we're like, dude, these are the ticket. Like, and so we ran 50 of them, we ran 70, 60 of them. And we're like, there's all of this stuff going on. And so it's just an overload of information. And there was like all the good stuff that you mentioned there, but it was paired with a lot of like potential negatives. Like there's an addictive element of it.
Well, yeah, it for a couple of years there, shamefully, it replaced my scouting. Like I just put a camera up and I got a picture, and then I knew, and so I was chasing pictures.
It's like, who are you going to trust? My intuition that something's going to do this, or this picture that says he's right there right now?
I chased pictures for 2 years, and I was a step behind. I was almost discombobulated when I got in the woods because I hadn't been in there. And so this year I took a big step back. I still use them from an inventory. Like I'll have one camera in this area, one camera here, but I'll run SD cards and I'll pull them every other month or whatever. But it's purely, I just want to know there's a deer in the area I want to hunt, and then I put everything else aside.
Yeah, I think that's the key. And then the benefit, the upside that I see on the cell cameras is you can learn more in more locations. Like, I'm going to start putting them in bedding areas when I get, away from the season, because I want to know. I mean, I read these deer studies, these movement studies, and different organizations, Mississippi State University and some of these other ones have done these extensive studies, and it doesn't all line up with what I've seen. So I'm like, okay, what really is happening? Like how often does a mature buck go back to his quote unquote bed? I want to know. So, I can see some really cool benefits of being able to go in and put cameras in places just to learn what to do. And you can't do that with an SD card camera, at least, not here.
Yeah.
It's just too much intrusion.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just going to be fun. It's going to be fun to learn more about just how deer behave. It's all part of the game, I guess, of trying to figure out how to outwit them. It's a chess match that we're in, and they seem to be like better. They're chess masters, and we're like those high school kids learned how to play chess during some extracurricular school camp, and we're getting our butts kicked. It'd be more fun to understand the rules that they're living by a little bit better.
Yep, agree. Yeah, and I think that getting that data in real time, you can always pull SD cards and then try to go back and be like, okay, what's the weather do, or enter it into software or whatever. But when you're sitting there and you're like, boy, it's whatever, a north wind, and I'm surprised it's kind of gloomy, but they're moving. Like, you're making that connection so much faster.
Yeah, and even if you don't learn anything about a specific buck, like we're talking about, where you don't cross some line, where it's like you made the hunt too easy or whatever that case might be, you're still learning about deer.
Yes.
And then as you pair that with your already, hopefully, woodsmanship skills, and that just makes you better at beating them at their game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, to me, they just have the edge. I've got to learn more in order to feel like I'm in the game sometimes. There's certain situations where they're pretty easy to kill, but a lot of the time they're really, really hard to kill.
Yep.
Why? Why are they so hard to kill?
Yeah, I've been asking myself that a lot. I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Well, that's the puzzle. I think that's the chess match that just is so intriguing.
Yeah.
And this is just one more piece of information from these cameras that can help us to understand the deer. Not necessarily make them easier to kill, but make us better at just understanding what they do and how they live and why.
Yep. Yeah. No, I agree. Well, man, we appreciate it. I know you're on a tight schedule. You got stuff to do. You got to get back home. So thanks for dropping, an hour and a half plus with us here on mid-November. That's a tough ask from a Bill Winke, I know.
Yeah, and it's the lull period. I mean, granted, there might be some movement going on out there, but I got to give the farm a break, like we talked about.
Yeah.
And this is a good time for that, and I'm going to come back and hit it hard, on the back end of the breeding cycle.
Well, if the weather holds as it says it's going to, like Illinois, Iowa's going to have one heck of a good front right about that same time. So I think it'll look pretty good for a lot of people.
Yeah, and it'll just be fun for another 2 weeks of trying. You still feel like, well, even though the best part of the rut is maybe over with, I'm not done yet. So this gives me some hope.
Yep,
absolutely,
agree. Well, we appreciate it, man, and thanks for spending time with us, and good luck the rest of the season. For sure, keep us posted. We'll be watching every week as the norm.
We are watching, Bill. If you ever feel like you're out on this farm alone with no deer and no shooters, there are people watching.
There are people watching.
And you're more relatable probably than ever, because most people's farms suck. And you're going through some challenges that most people can relate to. So
I'm not sure I want to be relatable. I kind of want to be successful, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's the cloudy days that make the sunny ones so great.
Well, when it happens, it will be sweet. It'll be a sweet moment.
Either way, the quest is, whatever they call it, the journey is the destination. And I just love hunting. So that's why it's, you keep doing it. Even if you don't kill anything, it still feels good.
Yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely. The HUNTR Podcast is brought to you by Muddy and Stealth Cam trail cameras.
Cell cams. What an evolution the industry has seen, and we've experienced personally over the past 5, 10, whenever cameras were invented, right? It's like, man, it's totally changed the way that we inventory deer, pattern deer, and ultimately the decisions that we make when we're going out to hunt. They're a serious piece of the puzzle, and that information is invaluable for us. We trust the Muddy and Stealth cams, together to be able to collect any of that information.
Yeah, I mean, as an admitted trail cam addict, I've definitely been guilty of underhunting places or relying too heavily on that information that's come in. That said, it's an invaluable tool to the overall management plan and strategy that I have for my own properties or even hunting public land. It doesn't matter. We have a finite amount of time in going out and hunting. So when you and I are after a particular class or quality of deer, usually a mature buck, we can't waste time hunting an area where that deer doesn't exist. And those cell cams provide that information that allow us to spend the time in the area with the highest chance to accomplish our goals.
Say it all the time, man. It can't kill them if they're not there.
That's it.
So right now, any of our listeners can use code HUNTR20 to get 20% off either Muddy or Stealth cameras. We're certainly going to be taking advantage of that, and we hope you guys do too.
Yep, check out Stealth Cam and Muddy. Bill Winke.
Mr. Bill Winke, Mr. November.
We've been talking about it for a while, and it's like, like I said, I've known Bill since, I don't know, 2010 at least, 2010 or 11. And I knew going into it, I'm like, boy, it's November though. Like, this is a tough ask from Bill Winke. And so I texted Bill. I don't know. This is when we were coming back. I was texting him because literally we wrote like dream big on the hashtag of these bucks and stuff. Like, it was perfect. He loved it. I said, hey, I know it's mid-November, but would love to get you back on
You're
here.
like, hey, Bill, I know you're not seeing anything. Why don't you slip out and spend some time with us?
I think I started off soft. I think I texted him. I said, so you've been sitting all day?
A little more kid glove, huh?
You've been sitting all day? And he said, yeah, but I'm getting pretty tired of it. I said, cool. You want to come on the podcast? And he's like, yeah, I could make that happen.
I could probably make it happen.
Yeah. So it was perfect. And I was like, all right. I was like, well, we'll keep it concise. I had no idea they was driving through. I knew his mom and dad lived right there.
That's wild.
I had no idea that the farm was that far.
The question then is, why did you buy a house so far? Or was that bought first?
It was bought first. They sold, they moved, and then he started looking for the farm. I think probably, just like any of us would, is he probably thought he would buy a house and farm together. Obviously, none of those panned out. This was the option that came up.
Or maybe the house just was more available, and then he thought when he would buy a farm, he'd sell the house and build on it or something.
But
maybe the time lane for the farm and getting it to where it needs to be is delaying the house.
Yeah, and I'm sure, just like anyone we've talked about before, Bill was probably 1031-ing stuff. So
I don't remember if he did, because I remember he made that commercial
investment.
Does he still own that? He sold that, right?
I think he sold it, and that's probably what the farm
rolled that into the farm. Yeah.
I don't know, but hypothetically speaking.
Yeah,
so it's but man, it's funny and obviously very different, but like similar in a way of like his farm and my new Kentucky farm.
Very similar.
Very much like they look similar. Mine is all my food is on the top and then goes to the bottoms. His is flipped.
In a way, I think that is probably one of the most rewarding ways to do it. Like, if you, I'm sure it sucks in the meantime
to build it.
It's
tough.
But if you can build it, I mean, I think, there's probably some absence of pressure that would enable you to make any progress even with that. So even if it's happening at a slow rate, eventually, I mean, deer get a year older every year. That's what happens.
I mean, that's it. Yeah. And that's the hard part for both Bill and I. It's like every year is like we're holding the breath, right? So like this year, I've got a 5-year-old that I'll hunt, but I've got 3 3-year-olds that are big.
See, but if I'm Bill, and I guess I can understand his mindset, but like
he's got a 170 on the property. I mean,
yes, but you have 3 tags in Iowa in a whole season. I thought I would be more not to say obviously what Bill's doing is wrong, but we're very different places in life here and whatever. And I'm also from Pennsylvania, so I would go to Southern Iowa and hunt with my friends. I'd hunt one tag down there. I'd go shoot a management buck or whatever off one of my friends' farms. And then I would have 2 tags.
Yeah,
for my farm, for a management buck on my farm, and potentially, a trophy buck.
I think that's right. Yeah,
give yourself a little taste of the glory.
I know.
You know what I mean?
I think he as all of us do, including myself. It's like I've put so much into this farm that if I'm going to shoot a management buck, I want it to be. I'd rather put double the time in on this farm and make it happen here than go there and just because I don't think Bill Winke needs to kill a buck to kill a buck.
No. I know he doesn't.
So I think he'd rather.
But I'm sure he would like to.
I'm sure, clearly, yeah. I do think that he's got a big advantage going for him at the end there, where he said basically the Jordan buck and this mature 8 are overlapping. Yeah. So he's doubling down. He's got a good chance. I didn't realize
the fat buck had disappeared. Also,
I did see that somewhere. I don't know where I saw it, but yeah, and that hurts. And again, I haven't seen it, so I can't prove it either. It's like I'm relating the two, and I'm like, boy, I've got that timber and I've got that food, and I'm playing that game now of like, they've got to find this food, right? Like I'm just in my head going through. He's doing the same thing.
Yep.
He's like, I got all this food. Like, they're gonna find this food, right? They're gonna do what deer do when it gets cold in the late season. They're gonna come eat it. And I don't know.
Well,
I don't know. Maybe.
I would love to know if there has been like a documented case or cases where deer pick up and move their home range based off of resources, like whitetails. Certainly they'll do it within a season. Like they'll get up and go if it's like late season. It seems to be the best chances that a buck's going to move in where there is food and thermal cover or something.
Yeah, or this latter part of November here.
But will they literally, will they move because you've improved the place? Will they move in?
Like find it and shift their entire range?
Yeah.
I think it depends on what the environment is like, weather-wise. Like if it's a prolonged cold event, yeah, I could see them doing that. As long as the social stress is the stuff that we don't understand at all.
You're like 8 months? That's a very real possibility.
It's a very possible.
I can see that happening.
I can see that happening. You take that deal?
That's an Office reference for you.
Yes.
Little Dwight.
Little Dwight.
That's a very real possibility. I can see that happening. I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, if they're forced to basically just stay there per weather conditions.
But if the social stress
and it
side
turns
of things,
into, and I guess we're here now type of a thing, then yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know. Like if I don't necessarily know about other, but if there's just a pile of deer in there,
yeah,
those mature bucks don't like that.
Yeah.
They
like the privacy.
They like the privacy. Talking with Bill, though, has me pretty excited for the period we're in right now, which is this latter part of the rut. Bellies need to get full. Time that off with some cold weather.
I don't know if we're quite there. I think they're still rutting. I think.
I know, but it's happening. We're in that like trailing.
What day
end.
is this episode dropping? 26?
26.
So yeah, you're right in the. I'm just getting back from Illinois, probably, or I just did.
Probably killed one.
Rutting.
Probably killed one rutting.
I would guess I'll kill that thing at the fence gap more likely than I would kill him at the bean field is my guess.
The other thing we didn't talk about, and I definitely see it a lot, is this time frame you're going, I see scrape activity pick back up.
Oh yeah. Because they're going back in and they're redoing the same thing. They're like,
redoing
let me go back
the
to
whole cycle.
And rerun.
Wait a minute, I haven't found a new one. Let me go back and redo the cycle.
Let me check it again.
And that's when they die.
You don't check a trap line one time, right? You got to check it every day until everybody's caught.
And that's when they get caught.
Yeah. But then when you're talking about going like whatever, first, second week of December, as long as you get a cold front.
It's all belly.
And I do all the work ahead of time for you.
Yep. Yep. Set them up.
You'll be in good shape.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting.
We need to talk design strategy on a few of how to set up some of these blinds and stuff. And
yeah, we're going to, just for people listening, we're going to, so Jared mentioned it in that we've got a 3-acre cornfield. And then we've got about 3 acres, 2.5, 3 acres of beans between 2 different plots. And we got 2 bell blinds that we just bought because they're...
Got some brassicas too.
Yep, we got brassicas in there as well. A lot of brassica, actually. And some wheat and clover as well. But thinking that as we're talking about December, like they're going to start moving to that standing grain. And so we got 2 bell blinds specifically set up to try to position for those standing grain attacks. So yeah, we're... starting to play around
version of the trailer blind. It's more of a pick it up and walk, shimmy with it. They're light enough to do that with, and I think they make a lot of sense for.
There's hay bales all over the place.
Oh yeah.
So it just blends right in.
That is the biggest downfall. I mean, there's a lot of potential negatives with box blinds, but the biggest one is so many of them are immovable. Like you lock them into a spot and they're there forever, and it's like, well, okay, it was only the spot because of this So. Yeah, I think that was the right move to get some more movable blinds.
Yeah, I agree. So anyways, that's kind of where we're at. You'll hear from us next time on Thanksgiving in 2 days.
Yeah.
But yeah, we appreciate Bill coming on mid-November. Bill Winke. If that doesn't get you fired up, I don't know what will.
You can check all his stuff out on YouTube. Is
Bow Hunting Whitetails.
Bow Hunting Whitetail.
Hoyts. Bow Hunting Whitetails.
So check him out there. And he and Jordan are still after it, it sounds like. And
yep.
We're rolling into December here.
Sounds like he's putting about 2 weeks into timber here real soon. Coming up. That'll be a grind.
Oh yeah.
So, but
I wonder if we'll see him at ATA this year or Iowa Deer Classic.
I bet we will.
You want to go to Iowa Deer Classic this year? I think it'd be.
I'll take that deal.
Yeah, you guys should write in and tell us if you want to see Nick or not. I was trying to convince him that like he could come and be like Dude, that's Nick from the HUNTR Podcast.
Do we have to like give him a permission slip from it to his girlfriend?
I don't know.
Or we're his bosses and we're like, yeah, you're going.
No, I'm not going to make him come, but I think it would be cool for him to come. I think he would enjoy it.
It would be the full entourage at that point.
Oh yeah, rolling deep. All three of us.
We'll just have Nick walking around with a microphone just so you can hear his voice because you don't know his face. Unless they see a guy with a scruffy mustache and they're like, Nick?
Yeah. Pretty recognizable.
Pretty recognizable, yeah. Pretty recognizable. So, anyways, we appreciate Bill coming on for episode 221. And for everyone listening to this, we'll see you on Thanksgiving. Have a good couple days of hunting here, and we'll catch you next week.
Later.
Take me